BD Stories exposes the most incredible hidden identities. Who do you think Sarah really is? The conference room fell into a silence so complete that the sound of breathing seemed amplified, each intake and exhale marking the seconds, as Major Cole processed Sarah's words. The color drained from his face, as if someone had opened a valve, leaving his skin with a grayish pallor that made his weathered features look almost corpse-like. Ghost, he repeated slowly, the name seeming to stick in his throat, like something he didn't want to swallow. The other officers in the room exchanged confused glances, clearly recognizing the significance of the call sign, even if they didn't understand the full context. Special operations call signs weren't handed out lightly. They were earned through blood, sweat, and accomplishments that most soldiers could only dream of achieving. Captain Rodriguez was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. The ghost who completed the most intensive training program in naval special operations. The first woman to graduate from the Advanced Underwater Demolition course. His questions hung in the air like smoke, each one adding weight to the revelation that was reshaping everyone's understanding of the woman they had dismissed as invisible help just minutes earlier. Sarah nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that carried the weight of years of grueling training and dangerous missions that had forged her into something far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. I completed my training in 2018 and served with SEAL Team 7 until my discharge 3 years ago. And Major Cole's hands began to shake slightly as the implications of Sarah's identity crashed over him like a cold wave. Special operations personnel didn't just disappear into civilian life without leaving traces, and they certainly didn't end up working as custodial staff on military bases unless something had gone seriously wrong. You said March 15th, 2021, he said carefully, his voice tight with the effort of maintaining control. You said I was the commanding officer. What exactly are you implying about that mission? But even as he asked the question, Cole's mind was already racing backward through his memory, searching for details about a deployment that he had spent 3 years trying to forget. Sarah stepped closer to the conference table, her movement deliberate and controlled, in a way that made several of the officers instinctively straighten in their chairs. Operation Desert Falcon, she said, the mission name hitting Cole like a physical blow. A reconnaissance and intelligence gathering mission in the Kandahar province. My team was tasked with infiltrating a suspected weapons cache and gathering actionable intelligence on insurgent activities in the region. Her voice remained steady and professional, but there was something underneath the military precision, a current of emotion that spoke of pain carefully held in check. The mission was supposed to be a simple in-and-out operation, lasting no more than 72 hours with minimal risk of enemy contact. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Sarah continued her recitation, each detail delivered with the clinical precision of an after-action report. My team consisted of 5 operators, including me. The team leader was Petty Officer First Class Benjamin Cole, your younger brother Major. The words hit their target with devastating accuracy, and Cole actually staggered backward as if he had been struck. The family resemblance that Sarah had noticed from the first day she started working at the base suddenly made perfect sense, and the guilt that Cole had been carrying for 3 years felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. Ben was 26 years old, engaged to be married to his college sweetheart, and planning to leave the service after his enlistment ended to start a family. Cole's breathing became shallow and labored as Sarah painted the picture of the brother he had lost, bringing back memories that he had worked so hard to suppress. Ben was a good soldier and a better man. Sarah continued, her voice softening slightly as she spoke about her fallen teammate. He was the kind of leader who would rather take a risk himself than put his people in danger, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and sent care packages to his team members' families during deployments. The other officers listened in stunned silence as Sarah's words brought the dead man to life in their imaginations, making him real and human rather than just another casualty statistic in a long and complicated war. The intelligence for Operation Desert Falcon came from multiple sources. Sarah continued, her voice regaining its professional edge as she moved into the technical aspects of the mission. Satellite imagery, human intelligence assets, and intercepted communications all pointed to a significant weapons cache in a compound approximately 15 kilometers southwest of Kandahar City. The initial assessment indicated minimal security presence and a high probability of success with low risk to personnel. Cole's face grew even paler as Sarah recounted details that he remembered all too well, facts that had been burned into his memory during the investigation that followed the mission's catastrophic outcome. But Sarah's expression hardened as she reached the critical part of her story. 24 hours before the mission was scheduled to commence, Ben contacted the command center with concerns about the intelligence package. His advanced reconnaissance had revealed discrepancies between the satellite imagery and the actual conditions on the ground. She paused for a moment, letting the significance of that information sink in before continuing. Ben requested a 48-hour delay to conduct additional surveillance and verify the intelligence before proceeding with the infiltration. His exact words to you, Major Cole, were that the compound appeared to be too quiet, too clean, too convenient. Cole's knees gave out, and he collapsed into the nearest chair as the memory of that conversation came flooding back with crystal clarity. He remembered Ben's voice on the radio, calm and professional, but with an underlying note of concern that should have been a warning sign. He remembered the pressure he had been under from his superiors to show results to demonstrate that his command could execute complex operations on schedule and within budget. Most of all, he remembered his own voice responding to his brother's concerns with dismissive impatience. "I told him to proceed as planned." Cole whispered, the admission torn from his throat like a confession under torture. "I told him that delays were not acceptable and that the mission timeline was non-negotiable." Sarah's next words fell into the silence like hammer blows, each one driving home the magnitude of Cole's failure. 6 hours after Ben's team entered the compound, they walked into a carefully prepared ambush. The weapons cache was real, but it was also bait, part of an elaborate trap designed to capture or kill American Special Operations personnel. Her voice never wavered, but the pain behind her words was unmistakable to everyone in the room. Ben and 3 other members of our team were killed in the initial contact. The 5th team member survived long enough to be captured, tortured, and executed 3 days later. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Cole's ragged breathing and the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. The magnitude of the tragedy was almost too large to comprehend. 5 elite soldiers dead because of a command decision that prioritized politics over personnel's safety. The after-action investigation concluded that the intelligence failure was the result of enemy counterintelligence operations that had been ongoing for several weeks. Sarah continued, her voice taking on the detached tone of an official report. But the investigators never had access to the full context of Ben's final communication with the command center. Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew an older model cell phone, its screen cracked and its case showing the wear of years of careful handling. "Ben called me during the final moments of the ambush," she said quietly, holding up the device so everyone could see it. "He didn't know that my phone was set to automatically record incoming calls, a security feature I had activated months earlier for operational reasons." The implications of what she was saying hit Cole like a physical blow, and he began to shake his head in denial, even before Sarah continued speaking. Everything he said in those final moments was recorded, including his assessment of what had gone wrong and who was responsible for the intelligence failure. What terrible truth had been revealed in his final moments, and how would it change everything they thought they knew about the mission? Type betrayal? If you think there's more to this story than we know. Sarah's finger hovered over the play button on her battered phone for a long moment, the weight of 3 years of grief and anger visible in the slight tremor of her hand. The conference room had become a tomb of silence, with even the distant sounds of military activity outside seeming to fade away as everyone focused on the small device that held the potential to destroy lives and reputations. Major Cole sat slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands, as if he could hide from the truth that was about to emerge from that cracked phone screen. "Before I play this recording," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent years deciding whether or not this moment would ever come. "I want you to understand that Ben died believing he had failed his team. He died thinking that he had missed something, made some mistake that led them into that trap." The opening seconds of the recording were filled with the distant sound of gunfire and explosions, a chaotic symphony of combat that made everyone in the room flinch instinctively. Through the noise came Ben Cole's voice, strained and desperate, but still maintaining the disciplined communication protocols that had been drilled into him through years of training. "Ghost, this is Bravo 6. His voice crackled through the phone's small speaker, each word punctuated by the sharp crack of rifle fire. "We are in contact with a large enemy force. The compound was a trap. Repeat, the compound was a deliberate trap." The sound of his breathing was audible between words, quick and shallow, in the way that indicated he was moving under fire while trying to coordinate his team's response to an impossible situation. Sarah's eyes never left Major Cole's face, as Ben's voice continued watching, as each word drove deeper into the Major's conscience, like a blade twisted in an old wound. "The intelligence package was compromised from the beginning," Ben's voice said through a burst of static that suggested he was speaking while rounds were impacting nearby. "This wasn't a failure of reconnaissance or a mistake in analysis. Someone fed us information that was designed to get us killed." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, its implications clear to everyone listening. Special Operations intelligence didn't just accidentally become compromised. It required deliberate action by someone with access to classified information and the authority to manipulate mission parameters. The gunfire on the recording intensified, and Ben's voice became more urgent as he tried to communicate what he had discovered before it was too late. "Ghost, listen to me carefully, because I might not get another chance to say this." He said, his words coming faster now as the tactical situation deteriorated around him. "Major Cole knew about the intelligence problems before we launched. He received a warning from our assets in-country 48 hours ago, but he buried the report because the mission had already been promised to the Pentagon brass. Sarah watched Cole's face crumble as his brother's words exposed the truth that he had spent 3 years trying to bury beneath layers of official reports and bureaucratic language. Captain Rodriguez and the other officers in the room listened in horrified silence as Ben's voice continued its posthumous testimony from beyond the grave. The Major was told that delaying this mission would reflect poorly on his command performance and potentially impact his promotion timeline. Ben said, his voice now strained with the effort of speaking while under intense fire. He made a calculation that our lives were worth less than his career advancement, and now my team is paying the price for his ambition. The brutal honesty of Ben's assessment cut through the room like a physical force, leaving everyone struggling to process the magnitude of the betrayal that had led to his death. The recording captured the sound of an explosion much closer than the previous ones, and Ben's voice became weaker as he continued his final report. I tried to convince him to delay the mission, told him that the intelligence didn't match what we were seeing on the ground, but he ordered us to proceed anyway. Ben said, his words becoming more labored as his physical condition deteriorated. He said that questioning orders was not our job, that we were soldiers, and our job was to follow commands regardless of our personal concerns. Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she listened to her teammates' final moments, remembering her own frustration at being ordered to provide overwatch support from a position too far away to provide effective assistance when the ambush was sprung. Major Cole finally looked up from his hands, his face streaked with tears that he made no attempt to hide, as his brother's voice delivered the final devastating blow. Tell Sarah that this wasn't her fault, Ben said, his voice barely audible now over the increasing intensity of the firefight. Tell her that she was right to question the mission parameters and that I should have listened to her concerns instead of following orders that I knew were wrong. The sound of automatic weapons fire grew closer, and Ben's breathing became increasingly labored as he fought to stay conscious long enough to complete his final message. Tell my brother that I died knowing the truth about what he did to us, and that I hope someday he finds the courage to be the man I thought he was. The recording ended with the sound of a final explosion and then silence leaving the conference room, filled with the kind of profound quiet that follows a catastrophe. Captain Rodriguez found his hands clenched so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had gone white, while Lieutenant Harris stared at the phone, as if it contained some terrible curse that might spread if he looked away. The steady tick of the wall clock seemed to count down the seconds until Cole's complete psychological collapse, each mechanical sound echoing in the oppressive silence that had settled over the room like a burial shroud. Outside, the distant sound of soldiers conducting their morning exercises provided a surreal counterpoint to the destruction happening within these four walls, their shouted cadences and rhythmic footsteps. A reminder that the military machine continued to function even as one of its officers faced the complete annihilation of everything he had built his identity upon. Cole's face had transformed from pale uncertainty to ashen despair, his features seeming to age years in the span of minutes as the full weight of his brother's posthumous testimony settled into his consciousness. Major Cole's shoulders shook with silent sobs as the full weight of his responsibility for his brother's death settled on him like a physical burden. The other officers sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the horror of realizing that they had been witnessing not just a military tragedy, but a profound betrayal of the trust that held their entire profession together. Sarah carefully placed the phone back in her pocket, her movements deliberate and controlled, as she fought to maintain her composure in the face of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. The official after-action report stated that intelligence failure was the result of enemy counterintelligence operations beyond our control, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tears that had begun to flow down her cheeks. It made no mention of the warnings that had been ignored or the pressure that had been applied to proceed with a mission that multiple people knew was compromised. She looked directly at Cole, who was still crying openly as he confronted the truth of what he had done. 5 men died because you decided that your career was more important than their lives, and then you let their families believe that their deaths were the result of unavoidable circumstances rather than preventable command failures. Cole tried to speak several times before any words would come, his voice breaking as he attempted to justify actions that he now realized were completely indefensible. I was under enormous pressure from my superiors. He finally managed to say his words barely audible through his tears. The Pentagon was demanding results, and my commanding officer made it clear that any delays would be seen as a failure of leadership on my part. But even as he spoke, the words Cole seemed to realize how hollow they sounded in the face of his brother's recorded testimony. I convinced myself that the intelligence was probably accurate, that Ben was just being overly cautious because it was his first mission as team leader. Sarah's expression hardened as she listened to Cole's attempted justification, her patience for his excuses exhausted by 3 years of carrying the truth alone. You knew the intelligence was compromised because the CIA station chief in Kabul sent you a priority message, specifically warning about possible enemy infiltration of local information networks, she said, her voice cutting through Cole's self-pity like a laser.